Okay. What concepts do we usually associate the word East with? I will suppose that the words enigmatical, mysterious, and unusual comes first in your mind. When my professor asked me this question at the lecture, it was the first time I thought about the topic of how I create my image about Asia. I asked myself, why, when I say the word China, I instantly recall the Great Wall? Why, from where do I have a number of associations related to Japan as a country where only sushi is eaten? And the same number of associations related to India as a country that was a British colony in the past. So, how do we model our imagination about Asia? Orientalism gives answers to this question. Researchers took up the study about our interpretation of Asia many years ago. But the main dilemma was that we Europeans started not only to create our image of Asia, but also to tell them how does their religion, history, and culture look like. So, but you think, why should we know this theme about Orientalism? Actually, this question is becoming more and more relevant in the international politics and nowadays, especially in relations between the East and the West. But discussing Orientalism, we should define what Orientalism actually is. Probably each of us has heard this word for many times, but do understand it in the right way? I took as a basis concepts considered by Edward Said in his book Orientalism. So the first definition says that Orientalism is our way of communication with the East, which is dominated by Western understanding and concepts. The next characterizes Orientalism as Western character of judgment towards East. So here Orientalism is an assessment of the East through the West. And the last one, in my opinion, is the most important and the most interesting, because here Orientalism is the legitimization of the domination of the West over the East. So it is a symbol of the power of the East through the West. We should also notice that there are two kinds of Orientalism, explicit and hidden. Explicit Orientalism manifests in ideology and political sciences, so it's easy to notice it and criticize. But hidden Orientalism is in our inner feelings and our internal perception of the Asia. So let's look in which special cases Orientalism is manifested in. Orientalism is manifested in the use of broad generalizations and a summarized approach. Western civilization has created special stereotypes about the Orient. For example, when we say the word Oriental man or Oriental woman, we usually have a generalized image of such people, formed by our own culture. Moreover, we believe in these images. We also often associate the East with some exotics, spirituality, and mystery. We do not try to understand the system of their thought, deep symbolism, and the philosophy of life, but we call it just generalized word religion. And Orientalism also manifests in historicism, in the view of the Orient. The consideration of the Orient through the prism of classical texts, because the European tradition has created a special classical past of the Orient. When we are studying history of the Orient, we're focusing not on the more modern part of the history, but on this classical past. As the example is that India is associated as a country of creation of Buddha religion, or China with emperors and their buildings, and Egypt with the rules of pharaohs and pyramids. So the East is characterized beyond a certain time and extent. Characterizing the East, we also are textualizing it, and there are two aspects of textualizing, because the first aspect is that we're looking for holy books on the East. We do not realize the existence of the Hinduism without the holy book, as well as we do not understand the existence of Christianity without the Bible, or Islam without the Quran. So researchers also, another aspect is that researchers, instead of going to the East and studying initially, are studying only literature about it. So distorted information is going from one author to another one. The next aspect is that Orientalism is discussing is the weak expression of personal nature. But what does it mean? To understand this, we should quote George Orwell. He asked, "Are they really of the same flesh and blood with us? Do they have names?" The West mistakenly sees in the East one mass of Oriental people. When we think of our nation, we see among them people with different characters, goals and desires. And when we see the representatives of the East, we only call them the really generalized word Asian. So Orientalism also manifests in the emphasizing differences between the East and West. So we call the West as we call the East as a West in contrary. In such representations of the East, there is so many and why towards it. Maybe we are only jealous of wealth and diversity of their cultures. Also, Orientalism is manifested in the active role of the West towards the East. So the West plays an active role, initiates a cognitive impulse in the interaction of cultures. We should notice that the West emphasizes its importance in the world, and the West took a responsibility for a fate of a whole world. So we should summarize that our imagination about the East has influenced a lot of factors, such as textuality, ahistoricism, the West civilization mission, and the emphasizing the differences between the East and West, and others about which I talked before. But we should ask ourselves a question. Do we have a right for a free interpretation and the creation of the concept of what Orient really is? So this problem and this fact is becoming more and more urgent in the contemporary world, especially in the international politics. So we should study this problem. And I believe that discussing this question will help us not only in the academic atmosphere, but also will help us to avoid the wars and to perceive the peace in the world. Thank you for your attention.